Welcome to Digital Hospitality. I am your host, Sean Walchef. This is a Cali barbecue media production. Every single week, we talk about our thesis, which is every business needs to be digital and every business needs to be in the hospitality business. That is digital hospitality. We talk about how can we all become better storytellers digitally. One of the things that we like to explore is people that are in media, people that are in marketing, people that are influencers, people that are podcasters, entrepreneurs, people that are in the hospitality space. And we've been very fortunate as a barbecue media company to make some incredible connections. We call them oh shit moments because of the internet. And those oh shit moments led me to today's guest, which is Jim Trotter. He is not only our guest, but he's become a close friend. And I'm going to let you guys in on the oh shit moment that introduced me to Jim. Back in 2015, Jim Trotter was on a local sports radio show here in San Diego on the Dave and Jeff show on 1360. And he was promoting his book about Junior Seau, the life and death of a football icon. Junior Seau, as many of you know, Chargers players, Hall of Fame player that took his life. But Jim was on the program with Dave and Jeff, reminiscing about his time meeting Junior, covering Junior as the beat writer for the Chargers. Jim worked for the Union Tribune for 18 years. Then he went to Sports Illustrated. Then he went to ESPN. Now he works for the NFL Network. And he's also host of the Huddle and Flow podcast. And but he was on the show talking about the book and reminiscing and talking about Junior's restaurant. Junior had a restaurant here in Mission Valley, very popular restaurant. And that's where Jim and Jeff and CS Keys used to go to watch fight night. Huge fight fans, boxing fans, UFC fans. And it just so happens there was an upcoming event at that weekend. There was a fight. And Cali, we've been, one of our things that we love to do is host fight night. So I was listening to the conversation, driving in my car, heard them talking about it. And as Sales was no longer in business, I sent out an invite through Twitter to Jim Trotter, Jeff Dotseth, and CS Keys. And thanks to their attentiveness on Twitter, they responded, yes, we'll come out to Cali. And that was the beginning of our friendship. And Jim, it's been an incredible six years that we've known each other, but thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, come on, man. Anytime you ask, I'm there, so it's all good. The part of this story you didn't tell is that we kept coming back, not only for the friendship, but because you laid out that platter in front of us.
Yes.
That sample platter that had everything. So we were hooked. There was no way we were not coming back.
That's, it's one of the things that I love the most about this podcast is it allows me to explore, like I said, our thesis, but it's that technology has broken down so many barriers before from people that you can admire from afar, but you can develop a relationship with it if you're willing to put yourself out there, social media, there's so many documentaries out there. It gets so many bad raps of all the bad things and all the negatives, and we can go down there, but I always like to focus on the positives, and the positives is, would you and I have been friends if it weren't for Twitter? Possibly. But Twitter certainly helped that because of storytelling. You were literally on the podcast, on a radio show, terrestrial radio show, AM radio, with Dave Palais and Jeff Dotseth, who have now both become great friends as well, very close to me. And because of Twitter, because of that interaction, because of a willingness that we have common interests, hey, we're hosting a fight night. You guys want to come over for fight night? You came over, but one of the things, this is the second time we've had you on the podcast. The first time we had you above the butcher shop at Derek Marceau's shop at Valley Farm Market when it was called Behind the Smoke, and you shared your Twitter story. I'd love for you to tell our listeners about Twitter when you were working at Sports Illustrated and how that went down.
Yeah, back then, this would have been 2000, roughly 8 or 9. I go out to New York for a staff meeting we were having at Sports Illustrated, and they bring in the marketing and promotion team and whatnot, and they start talking about they want us to do more social media. And in particular, they wanted us to get on Twitter. And I'm not a big promotion guy, that sort of thing, or self-promotion guy. And so initially I was like, I'm not interested in being on Twitter. I really didn't know much about Twitter at that time. That tells you how ignorant I was to social media. And finally I started thinking, it didn't take me long, but it was like, look, the business is changing, the industry is changing, and I can either change with it and continue to progress, or I can be a dinosaur and say, nope, I'm doing it the way I've always done it, and sort of be left behind. And so I decided to get on Twitter, and I said at that point, I was going to try and make the best of it in terms of trying to engage fans, to talk about teams and those sorts of things. And again, just being so naive, I never knew what a troll was or anything like that, because I, again, was never on Twitter and didn't realize how many folks just want to get on there and argue, as opposed to just having an honest discussion about the pros and cons of something, or the good or bad or whatever it may be. And so then I had to learn to navigate those waters. But really for me, social media was more of just a way to keep up with the times and to stay relevant, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly makes sense, but I use your example a lot because it's happened so fast. And I mean, we started our restaurant in 2008. The first iPhone came out in 2007. And, when that iPhone comes out, it's a real understanding of like, that's really not that long ago, but all these companies that have been built on the backs of these smartphones, like the Facebook, like Instagram, like Twitter, like YouTube, like all of them, you can just go down the list of all these different platforms that have allowed people to have a voice and to allow people to interact without having to go through a traditional channel. As somebody that's spent his life in journalism before the internet, how did you used to get feedback from an article that you would write?
Letters to the editor. That's how old school I am. You have to remember, when I came out of college in 1986, there was no internet.
Yep.
Cell phones were as big as a phone book. So the only feedback we could get was people writing into the newspaper,
Like handwritten letter sent to the,
yeah, handwritten or typed, or them leaving a message on your work phone, filling up your voicemail. This was a time, remember, when I first came out, where for me to get news on what was happening with other teams across the country, I would literally go down to the corner newsstand on a Sunday and pick up, say, the Washington Post Sunday edition or the Miami Herald Sunday edition. It was, for the young generation now, they probably laugh at that because all they have to do is click on, those websites for those papers, and
Sure.
boom, the information is instantaneous. But back then, everything was by snail mail. And so even in the Sunday editions, as you know, they would put them together on like a Friday so that they could reach the West Coast in time on Sunday morning. So even then you're behind. But that was really the only way for people to reach me or other media members, was either writing a letter to the editor, sending a letter directly to you to the paper, or leaving a message on your voicemail.
Do you remember the first article that you wrote that got significant traction and that you got letters or the editor called you in? Or
No, it's I'm so old, Sean, that they all kind of run together
you
now.
don't remember the first one?
I really don't. You have to remember, I started my career in Muskegon, Michigan, which I had never heard of when I took the job. So I had never even been to the state of Michigan when I took the job. And so from there to Tacoma, Washington, to San Diego, to the Union, and then subsequently the Union Tribune, and then on to Sports Illustrated, ESPN, and now NFL Network. There have just been so many articles,
The
so
body of
much
work.
feedback that, yeah, I can't remember all of them.
So one of the things, I mean, I love having conversations with you and bringing people in, through this podcast, of understanding the difference between, when we try to break down the internet as video, audio, written word, and images. and it's really much easier to start to think of it that way than to start thinking of all the different platforms and the algorithms and how do you, gain traction. If you get down to it, truth vibrates the fastest. So when you write something that's compelling, when you do compelling work, no matter what medium it is, it's going to gain traction. Do you remember when you decided to go down this journalism path? Like what were you chasing?
Truthfully, it started when I was in high school. I had an interest in writing for the school paper, and I couldn't because I was playing on, our high school teams. And so it would have been very awkward for me to write about my teammates in the school
About
paper.
yourself?
Yeah, so I never had that opportunity. And when I was preparing to go to college, I was trying to figure out, okay, what do I want to do next? And obviously I love sports and I love football and had a chance to play some small college football, but I decided, you know what, I'm never going to be good enough to play in the NFL. So I really need to try and focus on preparing myself for life. And so it was like, okay, what can I do to be successful, to make a living, all those sorts of things. And initially, it sounds so crazy now. My senior year in high school, I took an accounting class, and it was like, and I got an A in the class, and I was like, okay, I want to be an accountant. And then it was like, do I really want to sit behind a desk, 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day, and just do numbers, which people who know me would laugh at that now because I'm so bad with numbers and can't add worth a, anything. And so I ultimately said, no, that's not really the route I want to go. So what else do I enjoy? And I enjoy sports. So I said to myself, what are ways that I can be close to the games and not actually play them? And one of the ways was writing. So by the time I got to college, I had a pretty good idea of what route I wanted to go and was locked in on that and stayed on that. The only real change occurred really my senior year of college. I was a broadcast journalism major, and I decided that I didn't want to go broadcast, that I wanted to go print. And the reason was, again, for people who know me, I'm fairly conservative by nature. And I didn't like the idea of being judged on how I looked or how I sounded or all of these things that didn't really matter, in my opinion. I wanted to be judged on the quality of the work. And so my senior year, without much of a print background, I decided that I wanted to go print. And it's one of the reasons I wound up in Muskegon, Michigan. As I say, it was a small 50,000 circulation paper. But what it did is it offered me an opportunity to continue to learn the business, the print business, without feeling that pressure of, man, every mistake could be lethal. And when I say mistake, it could be an approach to a story, how I wrote a story, whether it was good or bad, all those sorts of things. It was just a place where you could go and kind of just learn. And it was perfect because coming out of school, I had two offers, one in Muskegon for a full-time position and one with a Cleveland Plain dealer for a 6-month internship, which they were trying to tell me could become a full-time position after those 6 months. And again, the way I think is, you know what? If I go to Cleveland, knowing that I have some deficiencies, don't do as well as I want to do, and then they don't renew it, I'm kind of out on the street. So for me, it was more of let me go someplace again, develop my foundation, and build on that going forward. And that's what I did. I believe it was the right choice then, and I believe it's the right choice now.
So did you decide first it was going to be sports, or did you decide first that it was going to be
No,
writing?
sport. No, it was going to be
It's going to
sports.
be sports, and it was
Yeah.
going to be print.
Yeah, exactly.
When did you fall in love with writing?
It's a good question. I remember taking some courses in high school where we had creative writing courses, and I'm more of a straight line sort of guy, and I remember the teacher, giving us these tools for and in terms of our thought process of how to write creatively, as opposed to just giving the who, what, when, where, why, and how that you give in journalism. And I remember being intrigued by that. And I wouldn't say that I was necessarily very good at it. You know, I would argue today, I still don't view myself as one of these great writers. You know, the guys that I worked with at Sports Illustrated, I marvel at their prose, man. They're just, to me, they're so good. They were so good. So I always feel like, and still feel like, I'm more of a grinder. And the interesting thing about this business for young writers and whatnot is you you always, many times you try and emulate people that you like or you respect in terms of how they write, you know, their style and everything. And ultimately what you come to learn through time and through error, is that there's only one you, and your voice is unique. So be true to you, because you're never going to do it as good as someone else trying to be them, because they are them, you know, they are unique to themselves. So be unique to you, follow your voice. It was funny when I got to Sports Illustrated, it was the first time an editor had ever said to me, you know, use your voice. And I was like, wow, I get it, you know, and now I have to try and do that. And so whenever I get stuck or I get into trouble, and I think because I still go back, I read, you know, I have, you know, the books from Jim Murray and Ralph Wiley and all these others, and at times I will read their prose, just, you know, marveling at it. But then I have to come back and remind myself, they're not me, I'm not them, and I have to be myself. But sometimes it just sort of jump starts me, if I'm stuck, you know, in the process of writing something, particularly long form.
So I mean, I'm fascinated by anybody that's a true craftsman, and you're a craftsman that also studies other people doing their craft. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, whether it's a professional athlete, or you've been fortunate to cover so many owners in the NFL, so many front office executives. What's the common theme of the people that excel, that are playing the game within the game? Because there's people that excel that make the Pro Bowl, but I'm talking about what, you know, you being a Hall of Fame voter, as somebody that, you know, covers true excellence. What are those characteristics that makes, let's start with it with the athletes.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. You know, we had Steph Curry on the podcast, and one of the things I asked him is, regardless of sport, when you look at the truly elite athletes, is there a common thread through all of them, whether it's Steph or Tom Brady or, you know, whoever it may be in baseball, that sort of thing. And one is your commitment to it, your passion for it to be great, and the work ethic and what you're willing to put in, and those sorts of things. Um, and the other thing is being able to manage, when you're at that level, being able to manage all that goes on around you. And there was a saying, I can't remember who told me this, which athlete, but they said, always keep the main thing, meaning don't let all of these outside distractions, whether it's endorsements or media or fans, whatever, distract from what you are here to do and what you are trying to accomplish. So keep the main thing the main thing. And I think the great athletes are able to do that. They keep the main thing, meaning they are so focused on what it is they are trying to accomplish, that they don't go off course, they don't take detours, unscheduled detours, you know, if you will. So among, you know, more than anything, that's what I find with them is this. I always say, great players don't want to be great; they need to be great. And there's a subtle difference there, but it's so significant. You know, everybody wants to be great, but the great ones truly need to be great. You
Yeah.
know, they're not accepting of, well, I can do it this one game or this one night and not the next night. For them, it's like, every time I step on that hardwood, or I step on that grass field or that turf field, whatever it may be, I'm bringing it, you
Yeah.
know, and I have a standard that I have to stand up to, that's higher than what anyone else can put on me. And that's the other thing with these guys, as Steph was talking about, the way that they are self-driven, self-motivated, and all of the outside expectations that you think you put on them don't compare to what they put on themselves.
I find that fascinating. It's that relentless obsession. I mean, it's the Mamba mentality. It's a spirit, it's a spirit that literally, the Kobe Bryants of the world, the Michael Jordans, the Tom Bradys, they're not playing against the competition. They're playing against themselves.
Yeah.
And it's that obsession of every single day I'm playing against myself, that I have to be better, where they can't understand how does anybody else not live like that, which is why,
it's not a want.
Yeah,
it's a need. It's a need, you know. So you're absolutely right.
So when you're around greatness, when you cover greatness, is there an aura of, like, people have talked about when you're around Michael Jordan, just the way that it feels like there's a light radiating around people, JFK, certain people in life, no matter what their craft is, they bring this presence to them. Have you felt that presence covering athletes?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's an energy. And part of that is we created in our own minds as well, because we know we're around someone great. And so for me, I've always said this, whether you like someone or not, whether you like his team or not, I'm always fascinated with those who are great at what they do. Doesn't matter who they are. And I'm always interested in the process of what makes them great and how do they go about being great. So I remember I did this piece with Jerry Jones. And after the piece aired, there were these people who, chiming in about how much they hate Jerry and these different things that he's done that they didn't like, and this and the other. And I'm like, that's all fine. That's well and good. But all I know is that when it comes to business, he is one of the best in the world. Correct. And so I want to know why that is. I want to know what motivates him. I want to know how he views a deal versus how someone else views a deal, and why he's willing to take a certain risk that others might not be willing to take. All those sorts of things. So that, all that motivates me, fascinates me. And people like, oh, well, you're just blinded because you get to go up in his helicopter and whatnot. I'm like, yeah, it's pretty cool, but that's not what motivated me to do the piece.
Correct.
What motivated me to do the piece is to understand how this one man helped change the face of the NFL. How he, I don't want to say single-handedly, but I don't know that you can pick anyone else and say they had as big an impact on the NFL becoming what it is today versus what it was when he came into it. His vision for marketing, his vision for grandness, all of these things, other owners weren't thinking that way. And to the point where he even took on his own league to try and grow the NFL. As it's just those sorts of people fascinate me.
What was unexpected about covering Jerry? Because like you said, you have a preconceived notion. You've been covering the NFL, you know who he is, you've met him, you've done but then you go to do this piece, this Hall of Fame piece, which is, one of my favorite pieces of work that you did. And I know it was edited down to a very tiny segment that we'll put a link in the show notes, but it's fascinating for me as somebody that loves Jerry Jones, that loves the Dana Whites of the world. It's these people, these magnetic people that no matter what the controversy is that surround them, they wouldn't accomplish what they were able to accomplish if it wasn't for that spirit, that relentless obsession to literally can be they have to be this.
And the other thing too, Sean, is those two people you mentioned, Jerry Jones and Dana White, they're not impacted by what you think of them.
Not at all. Zero.
They're the type of people who say what you want to say, just make sure you spell my name right.
That is correct. They actually feed off of it. The more that people say something that they can't do it, the more that people tell Michael Jordan he can't play defense, the more that he actually starts to play much better defense. Yeah.
Like Jerry, what really was fascinating to me is, remember, he started building AT&T Stadium, and then the market, the economy just tanked, and he's all in on it. Pretty much everything he owns is all into this stadium, and the market tanks. And where some might have said, okay, we've got to scale everything back, Jerry said, you know what? We've got to make it even bigger.
Yeah.
We got to be even grander, and that's what he did. And so was that a risk? Heck yeah, that was a risk. But he went ahead and took it. He had a vision, and some people try and play scared. I call it the prevent defense.
Yep.
And you don't win when you play prevent defense, or you very rarely win when you play prevent defense. He's someone who's always on the attack. And I just, as someone who's so conservative by nature, that fascinates me because I can't sit here and tell you that I would have done the same thing that he did.
Yeah.
I might have scaled back, and tried to ride that thing out. But he didn't, and he won big because of it. So um, Dana White, another example, as you mentioned, during the pandemic, everyone's focused on what they can't do. And
Yep.
Dana White said, we're going to find a way to put these fights on, you know, and even if it means going all the way to Abu Dhabi, and he does it, and he did it, and more power to him. So just folks like that, they keep my energy going. They keep my interest going. You can only write so many game stories, so many, of the perfunctory features, those sorts of things. But when you get an opportunity to get around people like that and they give you the access, man, I could spend days just hanging out, learning from them.
So I want to talk about the Huddle and Flow podcast. I couldn't tell you how excited I was once you told me you and Steve had finally launched this podcast.
Yeah, people should know you were the one pushing me for quite some time.
I've been pushing you since we launched in 2017. Once I realized, what long form audio storytelling can do. There's nobody better than you to be getting on that platform, given how many incredible relationships you've made, but also the stories that you're willing to tell, because you are playing the game within the game. You want to know context, and you want to share, not just what's happened on the field, but what's happening beyond the field. And, for me, that's compelling. It's compelling because it's truth. And like I said, truth vibrates the fastest. What have you learned by working with Steve and putting on this Huddle and Flow podcast?
Oh, where do I begin? One thing that the podcast has done is it's an affirmation that there is a market for it, that there are people out there who are interested in what Steve and I have to say, in terms of when we first thought about doing this podcast back in 2018. What we said is that there are a limited number, relatively speaking, of Black men and women covering the NFL and covering sports in general, really. When you go in the press box, sometimes it can be a lonely place. And then we see the coverage of some of these Black athletes, and we say, the perspective of, and this is not in any way saying someone is racist or something, but life experiences are different for those who may have been raised in a white community versus those who were raised in a Black community, those who were raised in a well-off community versus those who were raised in a poverty laden community. And so Steve and I came up and said, look, we want to do a podcast where we can speak to issues of our life experiences, being Black men in America, and what those experiences were like, how it impacts what we cover, and how it might impact the people we're covering, those sorts of things. So I think there were some people who thought, that's such a narrow prism, and because we don't relate to those experiences, there really isn't going to be a market for it. And initially, they never told us no, but they never said yes, and they just let the idea die on a vine for 2 years, 2+ years. And then after the murder of George Floyd, when everyone was into this enlightenment mode, they came back and said, hey, remember that podcast you guys talked about? Are you still interested in doing it? And we just kind of looked at each other and kind of laughed, like, okay, we get what this is about. But you know what? That's okay. We'll take it and do what we do. And that's what we've done. And there is a market for it. And it has resonated with people. Maybe not all people, but that's okay. We weren't necessarily trying to reach all people. We really wanted to reach, number one, from a cultural standpoint, that audience, our audience, and to give a voice to those people who don't have a voice and feel they don't have a voice. And so it's been fun, it's been educational, it's been empowering, all of those things. And I'm just happy that we were able to do it at least for this 1 year, to at a time when the country is going through so many things, at a time when the NFL is going through so many things, particularly as it relates to diversity and inclusion. Um, this was an important time to have it for us.
Yeah, I mean, from the range of guests is what I appreciate the most. Having known you and having developed a friendship with you is, it's from anywhere from, from Jerry Rice, Patrick Mahomes, Arthur Blank, Chuck D from Public Enemy, Harry Champion, Jamila Hill, Sean Payton, Steph Curry. I mean, the amount of people that you've had on, you have them on because you want to have them on. And that's something that, people that aren't obsessed with the media like I am, huge networks, there's a structure in place to understand what gets broadcast, whether it's on TV, whether it's in print, whether it's on radio. It gets edited down, and this is the story, and this is what we're presenting. Very rarely do you get the long form context to understand what's really going on, to let somebody truly have a voice, to let someone truly share their story. And by listening to these long form conversations, I feel like I'm getting a seat at the table, at a very important table, at a very important time, to educate myself. My grandfather is Bulgarian, my wife is Bulgarian, but I grew up in La Jolla. I grew up in white immigrant privilege, but for me to understand, there's a lot of fucked up things that are happening. A lot. And I never realized it was as bad as it was until we all saw what's happened in the last year. And it's actually, to see people that I know, the things that they post on Facebook or that they post on Twitter, frankly, I'm not friends with them anymore. I no longer follow them because it's
it's always funny to me when you post certain things like, and then people talk about they lost so many followers on social media and whatnot. and I never worry about that number. It's like, it is what it is. I don't do this for followers. That's why it was interesting when people were out buying followers and whatnot. And I get the whole game of being an influencer and all of that. But it just, look, I always say, just be authentic and be yourself. And for me, I try and be respectful of the audience and say, everything I post is not going to be something of social significance. Because a lot of people do, for instance, follow me for sports. I get that. That's first and foremost. So I try and be respectful of that. But there also are times where there are things that take place in this country that are just so egregious that, you have to make people aware of it. You have to show it. And you have to be true to who you are in terms of how you're feeling about a given subject at a certain time. So with our podcast, someone once said to me, I wish I could tell you who it was, but in this business, follow your passion, write about what interests you, because if it doesn't interest you, why is it going to interest the reader? It's going to be reflected in your copy. So make sure it's something that interests you. If there's an anecdote or a nugget or whatever. And I've tried to, at times, again, when I get in trouble or I get stuck, I try and remind myself of that. Come back to what interests you. And ultimately that will relate to, or that will resonate with your audience. And if it doesn't, well, it doesn't, but at least you were true to yourself, which makes it easier to write. I think where we get stuck writing sometimes, again, is where we really don't feel anything about a story. We've just been assigned something, so we got to go cover it. And there's no emotional, for lack of a better word, investment in it at that time. And you can tell when you read someone's copy whether or not they were really into a story or not. And so as I get older, I try and pick more stories where I actually feel invested in it, as opposed to just one that I need or have to do.
Has there been something unexpected in the format of podcasting for you?
The one thing I've always tried to ask our guests or people who have done it for a while is, what can you tell us in terms of connecting with an audience? Do you go longer? Do you go shorter? Do you go topical, or do you just have a conversation, sort of all over the place, if you will? Just things like that. And do you need to go big name guests? Is that more important than, say, subject matter? All those sorts of things. And it's funny, at times the name recognition will drive the numbers.
Sure.
But at the same time, I just feel it's so important to talk about subjects that matter to you, and not just a name, a big name. And there have been names that we kick around because we book our own guests. Nobody does it for us. We book our own guests.
I love the show.
We do our own.
I know, and I can tell.
Yeah, we do our own research. We do our own interviews. We do our own editing. Everything with the show is done by Steve, myself, and Thomas Warren, who also graduated from Howard as well. All three of us graduated from Howard. And we do all the work ourselves. And but there have been times where people have tried to pitch us on guests. And, if all three of us aren't in agreement that, yeah, this is someone we're interested in, or we feel it fits with what we're trying to do, then we pass on it. And sometimes that's kind of awkward too.
Yeah.
Where, you have friends or whoever who are asking to get on, and it's like, it just doesn't work right now.
And once the more popular the show gets, the harder those are going to be to decline.
Yeah, the thing that's funny about the Shoshone, to be truthful, like when we started, we were like, okay, we're going to do once a week, and then we had so many people that we wanted to talk to.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it became twice a week.
Yeah.
And we just looked at the numbers recently, a couple of weeks ago, and we started in September, and we did 54 shows from September to March. And I didn't realize, I was a little naive to this podcast game, because people think, you just sit down and you start talking. It's more involved than that.
There's a lot of moving parts.
Yes. And you got to do
it has to be if you do it for the right reasons, it has to be an obsession. It has to be a need, back to I have to do this show.
Yeah.
If one person listens to it, then I win, but I listen to it. I get to have a conversation with Jim, and I know that it's so fascinating for me that I know other people are going to be fascinated with it. And that's why we have such a wide range of guests.
But it requires, people don't realize this, it requires research.
Yeah.
And if we're going to have Soledad O'Brien on the show, or we're going to have Lindsay Davis from ABC News, or we're going to have Chuck D, and you come on there and don't know much about their background, you only know the surface stuff, they know that.
Yeah.
And so they're less invested in it. And so it was funny to me. We were interviewing Lindsay Davis once, and I had done some research on her about how she got into the news business. And she had told this story once where she was actually on a student abroad. She was spending a semester in Spain. And one day she turns on the TV and doesn't necessarily fully understand the language, but she sees the news and the passion and whatnot, and something just hit her and said, that's what I want to do. And
Wow.
That's where her news career kind of started. So I brought it up to her, and and then they say to you, how did you know that? Wow, you've really done your research.
Yes.
And so when they feel you've invested in it, they're more willing to open up
and share,
and to give you greater insight into who they are and what they're doing, which is great for your audience.
Has it been the exploratory process, because you spend so much of your time in the NFL? This podcast has given you different subject matters to go and do research in. How has that been for you?
It's time consuming at times. So for instance, we had James Lopez, who is a movie producer. And he's actually, just started work on a biopic on Doug Williams, the former Washington quarterback, Super Bowl MVP and whatnot. And I don't know anything about the movie business. I love it. I love movies and all of that. But what I did there, you read up on his background and whatnot. And then in those situations, what I try and do is just say, I'm part of the audience. What would the audience want to know?
Yeah.
And actually I approached football when I was a beat writer. That's the way I approached my work as a beat writer is to say, what is it that the fans want to know? What are the questions that they want to ask? And that's why I think I had, I had my critics, but I also had my supporters when I was a beat writer, because I actually did try to approach it as a fan and say, if I'm sitting across from LT, or I'm sitting across from Drew Brees or Phillip Rivers, whoever it is, what is it that Charger fan wants to know from this player today? And those are the questions I would try and ask, even if sometimes they were uncomfortable. But I'm trying to be that conduit or that voice for the fan. And so, again, when I get in situations on the podcast where I might not be as well versed in a subject matter, even having done some research, then I go back to, what is it that interests me? What is it that I want to know just as a fan would want to know? So you start talking to James Lopez about the process of making films from the very beginning. How does an idea formulate? How do you take an idea, something from being an idea to actually being a script that's approved? How do you get it approved? Who do you have to go to? How many times are you turned down? Is there a window there that you say, okay, it's been turned down 7 times, let me move on? Which is like with Nnamdi Asomugha, who did Sylvie's Love, the former Raiders player, now turned actor. He told me when they got that script had been turned down 6 different times.
Yeah.
And yet they decided that it was worthwhile enough to keep pushing. And ultimately they get it approved. And it's one of the best films I've seen on Amazon Prime during this pandemic. It was such a beautifully done film. So just stuff like that, just be in the moment and ask the questions that your audience would want to ask, and not be afraid of looking stupid sometimes. Or like, I remember when we had Ron Rivera on, and at the time he had been diagnosed with cancer, and he's about to begin the process. So is there a delicate way to ask a grown man if he's scared about what he's about to go through? And I just said, in my mind, I'm saying, this is what people want to know, so just ask it.
Yeah.
And he'll appreciate the honesty. And so I just asked him, are you scared? And his answer was great. And he said, yes, and then went on to explain it, why, so again, part of it gets back to just authenticity, and not doing something for the camera or how you're going to look or any of that. Just have an honest conversation with people, do your homework and then have an honest conversation with them.
Speaking of honest conversations, you're going to be Professor Trotter soon. You're going to start having some honest conversations with the next generation of journalists in San Diego State.
Bro, I can't begin to tell you how excited I am. Seriously.
I can't tell you how excited I am for those students. There couldn't be a better professor to give them the truth. How do you?
But I'm also using that word scared. There's a part of me that's scared too.
What are you scared about?
I've never done it. So
I've been to a class. I've been to SDSU for classes that you've gone up and spoken at.
Speaking is one thing.
Teaching
is another.
Okay.
So you have to formulate your syllabus. You have to formulate each class, what it is you're trying to teach. You have to find a way to get through to those classes. And these are things I think about, that I don't want to shortchange them. I want to make sure that whatever we do, that it's something that's actually going to help them once they get out into that real world. Those sorts of things. That's a tremendous responsibility. Some might say, if you take it seriously enough, that it's a burden in some ways. So I take that seriously. And so it scares me a little bit because I've never done it. And I want to make sure that whatever I do, that ultimately at the end of the day, it does end up helping these students become productive journalists. So I'm excited, but I'm also a little scared, being truthful about it. But I know one thing, I'm going to give it all I got. And I know that with each class, I will get better. And therefore, hopefully they will be better for it. So I'm excited about it. Like you say, I've spoken at various classes. I recently got to to be a guest lecturer for a day at a friend's class up at San Jose State. And I love that. And again, I learned from that. He gives me the feedback afterwards about things I could have done and how I could have engaged. And this So it's all going to be a learning experience, but I'm truly looking forward to it, man. I'm excited about that as I am anything recently, in the last few years.
I'm super excited for your opportunity for those students. I know you're going to take the utmost responsibility and care to make it memorable and to give them the truth. And the truth is not just about the craft of journalism, but it's also the business.
Oh,
That's something that I think, I'm always fascinated with college curriculums and what I learned now in business as opposed to what was being taught in the textbooks. And it's, like we started behind the smoke because there's a bunch of shit that happens in business that nobody told me anything about.
exactly.
That's people. It's like you have to deal with people, you've got to deal with institutions, you've got to deal with this is the way things have always been done. And how do you navigate that? And navigating that is life.
Yeah. And here's the other thing. You just said something that's key. You said how it's always been done. Nothing frustrates me more. I mean, nothing than hearing people say to me, well, we do it this way because it's always been done this way. And that's something that I learned from, you talk about these people who are great at what they do and whatnot.
Yes.
And being risk takers is because they're not afraid to say, you know what, we can try something new. And I'm just saying, if I ever owned a company or a business and an employee or a manager says, oh, we got to do it this way because it's always been done that way, see you, you're gone.
Yes.
You know?
Correct.
So I hate that. And I find, especially many times in the NFL, people will say to you they want creative ideas or they want you to think outside the box, and then you bring it to them, and then they're afraid to step outside of the box because if it doesn't work, they feel like now their rear ends are on the line.
Correct.
And that's just such a poor culture, in my opinion, to be operating in. Hey, everyone knows you're not going to bat 1,000, so you got to take some chances. You're going to swing and miss at times, and that's okay. But when you hit that grand slam, you'll know it. It makes you appreciate it even more. So, yeah, like you said, there's so many things about the business. It's not just about journalism that I want to talk to these students about. It's about the business and real life things that you will face. So, yeah, I think you can tell I get a little excited about it because I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, it's a huge opportunity, and I can't wait to see how that goes. I hope you and Steve figure out a way to keep this huddle and flow going. I know there's just way too many stories that you guys can add context to, you can give platforms to, even with famous people that just haven't been asked the right question. That's another thing I love about podcasting and what it allows you to do what you do best, to do what Steve does best. And so many of the times the questions that you've asked have never been aired.
How about Todd Bowles, the defensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Bucks, telling us he was a security guard at a Mystical concert? I mean, come on, man. Are you serious?
Exactly. That's
That
exactly
was
why you do it.
awesome.
Exactly
And here's
why
this
you do it.
stoic guy that everyone thinks is so serious and, just no nonsense and everything else. And he's sitting up here telling us about being a security guard at a Mystical concert or being the chauffeur for Delta Sigma Theta sorority, and all of that on the side while coaching college football. Sometimes we just like to have fun with that, because one thing about the Black college experience in particular, with us being brought up in it, is when you're in it, it's different from a PWI, a predominantly white institution. There are stories that just you can relate to that just take you back, and we try and take our audience back to some of those stories and those fun days. So hearing Todd talk about that, we're actually thinking about putting together a show where we take things from many of the guests that we've talked to about the HBCU experience, and putting just together a show with their remembrances of all of that, and just having fun with it. So, and that includes guys like Anquan Bolden, who was at Florida State, talking about, how the PWI schools take their athletes over to the Black colleges to make the Black athlete feel more comfortable about going to a predominantly white school. So you have, for instance, in Louisiana, LSU would take its players over to Southern University.
Okay.
Or when I was at Howard, Georgetown, its basketball program back then with Patrick Ewing and all those guys, they would always bring their recruits over to Howard to hang out at our parties and that sort of thing. And that's how you do it. And those stories are just fascinating, man.
For sure.
So, yeah, just fun.
Well, Jim, I can't thank you enough for your time. You're a true friend. You're a mentor. You've been an incredible person in my life. I can't thank you for all the help that you have, all the support that you've given the restaurant. We love the Huddle and Flow podcast. Please check that out. We'll put links in the show notes. You can find Jim on Twitter. He is a tweeting machine. But more importantly, Jim, thank you for everything that you're doing. I truly appreciate you, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time.
No, brother, I appreciate you, man. It's always a pleasure. You ever need anything, you know I'm here. I appreciate the support and appreciate the good barbecue too. So I actually learned how to cook a tri-tip from you guys.
There you go. Yeah, Jim is in the barbecue game. He's got a big green egg that he got from Brian over at Hot Sauces and More, and he's a smoking machine on the weekends.
Brian moved though, right?
He moved over to San Miguel, the little shopping center over there. It's much better.
I thought that was him over there. So cool.
Yeah. So he's still in the neighborhood.
Yes, sir. No, I appreciate you, Sean. I appreciate Cali Comfort. And like I said, if you guys need me, I'm here.
You're the best. Thank you.
You got it, my man.